I think we are going to go ahead and get started. First and foremost, thank you all so much for coming out tonight. We really love hosting these events, so we really appreciate you guys being able to come out and enjoy them as well. Tonight's program is on backyard birding. We'll be talking all things birds tonight, so it should be a lot of fun. If y'all need to use the restroom at all during the presentation, the restrooms are right there, as well as the water fountain, emergency exits right behind me, and the door you came in through. If y'all have any questions, I believe those will be saved until the end, but please enjoy yourselves. Our presenter tonight is Scott Martin, the administrator of our Department of Parks and Outdoors, so let's give him a big round of applause.
Thank you all for coming. This is going to be fun. Let me start by saying a couple things to begin with. One, I am neither an expert, nor an ornithologist, nor a biologist. I'm just someone who, maybe like some of y'all with my wife during COVID, had this wake up of there's a lot going on around us and above us that I wasn't aware of. When we had to slow down to take in really the magic and the mystery of the South, it's a pretty neat thing. And I think I'm one of those knuckleheads that probably took it for granted growing up or didn't slow down enough to pay attention. So what I'm going to walk you through tonight is what I think makes living here so special. I'm going to give you some tips and hints that I've pulled from many, many colleagues who've offered advice, but I don't pretend to be an expert in any way. I just want to share some love that I have for these crazy birds and what they contribute to making our life here so special, and why, quite frankly, I think we're very blessed to live in this very magical place. And we have an enormous gift and responsibility to live here, and these little feathered friends tell us. I also have bad dad jokes. What's the only bird that works at a construction site called? A crane. I can do this all night. Why don't seagulls live on a bed? Because they'd be bagels. What's a polygon? A dead parrot. I can just keep going. Try the chicken. I'm here all night. The reason we're doing this is an evolution of our department as well. We just adopted some new mission and value statements, and what we're doing is intentionally organizing ourselves around city shaping work. Parks is baseball, it's soccer, it's football, it's sports. But if we do it right, it's also about shaping a city that has space for nature and people together. And I just want to share some of these values with y'all. You're the first civilians to see the stuff we've been working on as a team. But we've adopted what we believe in terms of nature and what nature means in terms of our city. And this connects to what we're going to talk about today. We believe that nature is necessary for sustaining healthy and happy lives, connecting us to one another and to every living being. We believe that nature has provided Chattanooga with its stunningly beautiful landscape, and it deserves our respect, care, understanding, and preservation. And we believe that nature offers lessons that can guide us to a more sustaining and healthy relationship with the natural environment and the climate that we depend upon for life and livelihood. These are becoming core values of what we do. And talking about birds has every bit to do with our job as much as building trails, as much as running programs for people with disabilities to get outdoors. This is in our DNA. So you're going to see a lot more of this going forward, both in the parks and the landscapes that we design, but also as we move very aggressively into conservation in our urban landscape. And if you're asking about why you and birding, and you're wondering, and you're doing a little self-reflection, like, am I weird? You're not weird. You're not weird because every bit of data that's coming out now continues to affirm to us that time in nature is what keeps us sane. It's better than taking a Zoloft or popping a Xanax. And for 100,000 years, humans have been going outside to have these moments. And you just have to scroll through Google searches to find out that they're finding concrete evidence that time in nature means you don't have to take antidepressants. And those are British people saying that. If anyone's going to take an antidepressant, it's some British. So we know the data is with us. And if you want to dig into that more, I cannot recommend the book, The Nature Fix More. In fact, this is our leadership read here as a department right now about how to deploy nature to give you spiritual, emotional, and mental healing in part of your life. I'm not going to say looking at birds can save your life, but I'm going to tell you, scientifically and by any measurement possible that we do, it can make your life measurably better. And if you share that joy with someone, I think you find those forces then manifest themselves even further. Why your yard? Well, I go back to the eminent philosopher of our era, George Carlin. Some of you are still old enough to remember who he was. He had this great quote: "We generally find ourselves in places where land was bulldozed and the streets were named after the things that were bulldozed." How many of us live on Maple Avenue? I mean, so Nature was here before we got here. And in Chattanooga, there's been 12,000 years of people living here in stories and relationships. And these birds we're going to talk about tonight have been part of this story for that same amount of time. And the houses that we look at that are built in all over our town that look like this, that's not really a habitat that can really support much life. The upshot is it's fixable. It supports these things, but with a little bit of work, we go from gray to green. And with your passion and what you're interested in and what we're going to talk about doing at home tonight, you can be part of a bigger story. I think everyone here in this room knows the Charles Kuralt line, the Walter Cronkite line of this was the dirtiest city in America, and how Chattanooga went from that to this, to one of the cleanest, most beautiful cities in the nation today. It's time for the next evolution. And the next evolution isn't about scenery, rather the next evolution is about how we take these yards and we pop them up. And I'm going to show you how we tune them up going forward. But before we do that, let's do a little pop quiz action. Let's check your bird knowledge. Now, this is, I won't own this as being perfectly scientifically accurate, but the biologist at Tennessee Fish and Wildlife told me it was close enough that it counts. So we're going to do the top 8 most populous bird species in Chattanooga, Hamilton County general area. And we're going to count backwards from 1 to 8. Does anyone want to guess what the number 1 most populous, easy to find bird is in Hamilton County? No. Nope. Nope. I love this. This is such a great contest. This is not going out how I pictured it at 2 a.m. when I did this slide. The number 1 is the robin. Number 2. And that surprised me that it's a downy woodpecker. I feel like we see them everywhere, but then it made sense when I started to think about it. Number 3, goldfinch. Number 4, house finch. Number 6, the crow. Number 7, but what type of sparrow? Nope, but they're here now. That's a really fun story. They're here now. It's the song sparrow. Nuthatch, our upside down friend. And finally, the red-winged blackbird. And if you go out anytime near any of our water pretty soon, that's all you're going to hear. And these are great birds, y'all. I'm not diminishing these birds yet. But what I am going to suggest to you is we can do a little better. And cities and yards and landscapes are just like instruments. They can be tuned. You actually can tune these things. And what is so cool after living, I lived out west for a while, what's so cool is how much tuning we can do in the South. Our landscape and our ecology here is a musical instrument. Our cities are musical instruments. They're dials. And little choices we make, like not planting a crepe myrtle, we'll talk about in a little bit, planting something else, can make big differences in what you hear and what you experience. And the motto that we use globally is called something called rewilding. The idea is we rewild our urban environments, we rewild our cities. And the concept is that we're not going to take man out of nature, but rather we have to make more room for nature with man. And we do this with intentional interventions. And if you're bored at night, look up Rewild My Street. It talks about all the little interventions we can do. And we're going to talk about some of these, from planting choices to design choices that produce spaces for us to share with wildlife. And we're not at war, we're not fighting, we're not going away from cities. We actually are embracing it all together. That's what really birding, I think, is in an urban. Because we don't go to nature, we don't have to go to Yellowstone. It's great to do it. But we should make more room for Yellowstone to come to us. And we should be more sensitive and thoughtful and aware of the nature that's right around us. Cities around the globe are doing this right now. That's Reykjavik. Reykjavik has a commitment now that every child before the age of 5 should encounter a puffin in its natural environment. They're not alone. London has made the similar commitment. London has now decided by decree to make room for its urban foxes. Our friends in Adelaide are doing the same thing. Now, what do you think Adelaide picked as their critter? Kangaroo's too easy. What's next? Koala! Come on. But they are intentionally going to make room for the koalas and share space with them because they're saying that's what makes living in Adelaide so special. And we can make room if we make intentional choices. And I think the question for us as Chattanoogans going forward is, what do we want to leave space for? And I think we have a wonderful opportunity to get in there if we tune up our yards. And if our yards and our landscapes begin to look something more like this, let's not get over aggressive. This is super gardener, so don't get insecure. But If we can move towards thoughtfulness and stories and planting and plant selections, we can tune things up quite a bit as we go forward. And we get to have a picture like this one day and attach a critter to it on the back end. And we happen to have a ton of Tennessee species that call our place home. The real kicker that gives us the big advantage is we have 4 distinct seasons. There's a new movie here that turns over every 3 to 4 months. If you live in Phoenix, you don't get that. If you live in San Diego, you don't get what we get. You get this movie that changes. And if you have any sensitivity at all whatsoever and can slow down, this movie becomes really fascinating. And it gives you things to look forward to. In the spring, with our spring migration, that really we're only about 4 or 5 weeks away from right now. Their birds are already moving up through South Africa. I was talking to some of the biologists down in Mexico. They're already tracking some of our warblers that have already entered the Yucatan. I mean, this motion that we're part of and this circulation of life, it just never stops. Y'all know summer, when the scarlet tanagers and all the birds show up, and the sound of our morning chorus, if you get up, it's one of the most beautiful things you'll ever hear. It's a symphony. And then in the fall, when the warblers come back through, and we all go nuts trying to identify them because they don't have the same colors they have in the spring. The jerks change colors on us. But how exciting is it to watch them move through in their waves? And then finally, in the winter, which I don't want to diminish, but the winter is a magical time. We have these white-throated sparrows that are only here right now in the winter that'll be heading back up north. And of course, the ducks and the waterfowl and the sandhill cranes. But each one of these seasons can be brought to your yard. And it's something to look forward to in these gray, dreary days, is the change that's going on all around you if we take the time. And it's part of one of the world's great migrations. I always thought of migrations as this. This is the caribou up in Alaska, one of the great migrations. And you know, this is showing you roughly the paths that those caribou migrations occur across. And you know, it's big space, right? Well, you live right in the center of the East Atlantic migration pattern between points in the Amazon and points in Canada. We're part of this story. I get pretty emotional and excited about that because it starts to knit my relationship to people in other cities across the planet. If someone in Belize blows it and tears down a forest, that bird may not be in my yard. If I blow it, that bird may not be back in their yard. We had a very interesting meeting. We're working on a park project you may have heard of at Montague Park, where we have a lot of new Guatemalans that are in our community. And for the first time ever, they're away from home. And we had a neat meeting with them where they were able to point out these birds. They called, my Spanish is so bad I wouldn't even begin to pronounce it, but it was a type of vireo that they remember seeing growing up with their grandparents. But they would see it in the winter in Guatemala, and they saw it in the summer here. But what that meant to them in terms of my connection, you know, you can't put a value on that. And if we draw those connections, it helps people feel more at home. And you're part of that story. And it's an enormous story. I just picked this one out of the blue. If you go to Birdcast during migration season, it's a website. Every night it'll track where the birds are moving to. This is all based on radars. Our aviation radars pick up the bird migrations. This is randomly, night of September 30th, 2021, 320 million birds are predicted to be in movement across the United States. And you happen to be at one of the bright yellow sites. It's kind of neat to think about it, because I don't know, I mean, I always have envy, I think we all do, Chattanooga's going to be the Boulder of the East. I don't want to be the Boulder of the East. I'm pretty happy in the yellow right here. I got a better show than they got in Boulder. But how do we experience it? How do we enjoy it? How do we celebrate it? And then you have these incredibly these survival stories that if you slow down and think about it, this black pole warbler, teeny little bird, probably 3 ounces, flies right through Chattanooga in its spring migration. And in fact, it's one of the early migrators here. But in the fall, it goes all the way across the Atlantic. It'll depart from Cape May, uninterrupted flight until it lands in South America. 3 ounces. The energy reserves. What if they hit a hurricane? I mean, these are like stories that just blow your mind away. At least they do for me. And we're part of it. Your backyard can be part of it. Climate change is here as well. And we're part of the story. And if we tune ourselves in, these things are observable. This is a little bit dated. I apologize, I couldn't find anything quicker. But this is showing from 2005, the northern habitat in the winter of some of these birds that used to go a lot further south. Snow geese moved from Texas to Oklahoma. Ring-billed gulls moved up from Mississippi up to where they were wintering into Kentucky. We're seeing these huge movements of birds that we haven't seen before as their ranges are changing. And that means the bird life of everyone in this room, in the city, is going to change markedly in our lifespans. And if we're observant, we're going to watch the story, good, bad, or indifferent, play out. What they tell us, biologists told me this morning, was we're going to see increases likely of scissor-tailed flycatchers here. They expect them to become here frequently over the next 10 years as they move their way over. Say's Phoebe. We have Phoebes here. This is a western type. They expect it to be in here a lot more frequently. Stilts to move their way in. Believe it or not, they expect barn owl habitat to increase as well in the Chattanooga area. So they're going to be, I don't want to say pluses, it's probably better to say changes, even though I think seeing a barn owl would be pretty much a plus. But we're going to see decreases as well with our warblers, Blackburnians, our black-throated blues, our kingbirds, they think could decline by up to 30 to 40% here over the next 10 years. That matters because kingbirds eat a lot of bugs. And they think our sharp-shinned hawks are going to decline as well. So things are going to be in movement in real time and real space around you. This is not a theoretical thing, wait for a PBS special. You'll be able to watch. Sure.
The decrease is due to lack of habitat for them, or temperature change?
All the above. All the above. For a number of these, it's the loss of habitat because the Amazon is on fire and they're losing their wintering grounds. That's a big driver. A lot of it is temperature driven as well. The bugs they eat aren't here anymore. How many of us know the windshield story? 20 years ago, we all drove around the summer around here, our windshields would have been plastered with bugs, right? I remember the smearing. That doesn't happen anymore. That's fuel for these guys. So these are all part of those changes. And then you ask me, well, really, my neighborhood, Scott? I mean, this feels like stuff I have to go up to the Smokies to see. No, all these birds are here. We talked a little bit about the flyway, but let me give you some numbers. 400, according to eBird, 434 species of birds have been seen, spotted, and viewed in Tennessee, and 331 species have been viewed here in Hamilton County since they've been keeping track. Those are big numbers. To give you scale, the whole state of Nevada is around 200 species. It's wilder here, which is pretty cool. And there'll be travelers possibly in your yard. You know, these guys aren't all residents. But we'll do a little quick bird ID here because these guys, they're going to show up pretty soon, but these are only travelers that move through areas. Anyone know what this is? Close. The other one? Indigo bunting. Yellow-billed cuckoo. Oh, this is my favorite at the moment. I have crushes on birds. They come and they go, I pick a favorite, fall in love, and then you fall out of love. Blue-gray gnatcatcher. So active. I'm going to tell you how to look for them in your yards because they're there, but you got to slow your heart down a little bit. Summer tanager. I know, warblers are so hard, right? I know this one, I had to recheck, and I'm not gonna, my wife's here, I'm not gonna look at her because she's much better than me. I believe I put a Cape May warbler in here. I hope I'm right. She's not. Yeah, passed. Yep, white-eyed vireo. Now, here's the fun thing. Show of hands, don't be embarrassed. How many of y'all have seen all 6 of these in your backyard? How many of you have seen 5? 4? 3? 2? 1. That's great. Let me tell you all a spoiler alert. They're all there. They're all there this spring. If you slow down and sit out, I'll show you some of the trees to look for. I don't want to guarantee because the cuckoo will screw everybody up, so I don't want to do that. But they're mostly there. You'll hear a cuckoo. I most can guarantee you that. So we want to get to why you had me here, because the big goal that we have with doing talks like this and doing all the conservation work is to turn neighborhood watch from that into this. This is the sort of neighborhood watch that fires me up. And to turn our cities from this into this. And the only way we do that is we connect people with wildlife and we start to acknowledge shared spaces. And it stops being the zero-sum game of development versus conservation. It has to be growth, or it has to be living and conservation. There has to be room for both. And cities are where we can get this stuff right. I'm optimistic about cities to be green spaces. And we're going to be rolling out a campaign later this year to make Chattanooga the first national park city in North America, joining London and Adelaide. But it starts with the specialness of our space and thinking a little bit differently. But you didn't come here to hear all that, but I had to get it out to y'all. So the question is, well, what about my needs up here for birds? So let's talk about some birds. And I don't know where to begin, but we'll be like the geese. We'll just take a quick little flight out here. Take a glass of water real quick. I got a little bit of Presbyterian minister in me somewhere, so I get going. Sorry. Step one, assess your setting. We don't live in all the same habitat types. So before you even start thinking about what's my yard going to do, what's my porch going to do, what's my patio going to do, assess your setting. What plants are attracting birds? Just be observational. Is there a park nearby with big trees that's supporting stuff? Is there water nearby? Do I live near a lake, a stream? These are very basic things, but you're going to want to write them down, and you're probably going to want to pay attention in a little different way than you have. Are there meadows nearby? And the reason I say all that, these are 2 residential neighborhoods, but don't you think they have 2 different bird species because of the habitat types? The type of feeders you choose, the type of plants you choose should first be informed with, do I live in the woods or do I live in the fields? And that way you'll set your expectations, because birding is a lot about being disappointed too. It's going to take a couple years of commitment to get it going and get your yard cranked up. You may get some lucky wins early, but you got to be in this for the long haul, because they are. But first, assess your situation, understand where you are. Then from there, you begin to develop your yard plan or your backyard plan. And we're going to spend the rest of the talk today, probably the next 30 minutes, really digging into this. And again, I'm not an expert, but I picked a lot of people's brains. We have some really great botanists on our team here in our department that help me. But we'll work through it the best we can, and I'm not a science major. But we first start with trees, the canopy trees, which are where we're going to find our warblers, or chickadees, or woodpeckers, or owls, or cuckoos. You want to look at your flowers, because that's where your orioles, your hummingbirds, and your tanagers come. They're very, very angry, very insistent about it. Water for all birds. You cannot leave water out of the equation. And I've done that many times where you put out a bird feeder, and you're like, why don't I get birds? And then put out a bird bath and watch. You'll get even more than you get when you put food out. We're going to talk about climbing vines here, particularly for our warblers and nightcatchers, our vireos, and a lot of nesting material. We're thinking in tiers here of how everything works together. Shrubs and your shrub layer for the cardinals, the mockingbirds, the thrashes, and the thrushes. That cover sort of material that they like there. We're going to talk a bit about grass, and I'm not talking about turning your backyard into a warm season meadow, but if you want to do that, yay, and bless you for doing that. Thank you, we appreciate you. Most of us don't live in a yard, we have that option. But where we pick our spots, choose letting grasses get high. We'll talk a little bit about that, because that's where we pick up our buntings, our yellow throats, our sparrows, and very importantly, nesting material for our birds that are going to be nesting. And then I'm going to say it again and again and again, the big one, reduce, if not outright eliminate your use of pesticides. All those bugs that annoy us, that get in our house, that's food. And anytime we interrupt that food chain, not only are we hurting the frogs and our amphibians and our tree frogs and everything else, it does work its way up the food chain. We all know that. And the birds suffer. So having the discipline to figure that out. So let me start with trees, if I may. And I'm just going to pick a couple. These are highlights that some of my bird friends and my tree friends recommended when I sat down and asked them real quickly, what would you do? I told my speaking to a group, how can I tell them to hit the gas pedal and floor it? What would you do? This is what they said. They said the red cedar for our community. Now the red cedar is a fun one because it's an early succession tree, which means it would come out, if a farmer lets a field go fallow, the first thing that'll come out in the American South are red cedars, and then deciduous trees will be behind it. So there are these first generation trees. The next time you fly around, just a spoiler alert, if you're flying around the South and you look out your plane on approach, if you see a field of red cedars, that tells you that was a farm field probably 30 years ago. You can actually read the landscape of where farming occurred and where it didn't based on these. But they're very critical and very interesting plants because they attract so much activity very early in their lifespan. And what they attract the most are cedar waxwings and warblers. The warblers are there for the bugs, particularly in the fall. The cedar waxwings are there for the fruit. And believe it or not, off the juniper berries, the cedar waxwings can get drunk. Their bodies metabolize it in such a way that it has the same effect as alcohol in them. So you can occasionally find drunk waxwings. It's not their fault, they're working on it. There's a member of several 12-step programs. I'm told it's going to be okay for them. But that's a really neat tree, and it's a winter tree for cover as well, which we all know when our deciduous trees drop, cover, 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 that gives us a big help. The next one I asked about was white oak. And everyone in this room, when we plant white oaks, why are we doing it? Because we're never going to see the trees. We're doing it for the next generation. These are generational trees. So this is the pay it forward tree. This is the moment where you say, I'm not going to plant the redbud or something small that I'm going to get a quick reward out. This is where you're saying in 50 years, this is going to be a great tree. And the good news is white oaks do so phenomenally well here. And if you've got a yard with a big white oak in it, which we happen to in my house, that's our ace in the hole for a lot of our wildlife, is that someone many years ago planted them and now we just reap the benefits. Because they attract a whole lot of activity. They are ecosystems unto themselves. Turkeys love acorns. And turkeys are back. I still remember the first turkey I saw when I was 11 years old. And now we see them all the time, and a lot of people don't think anything about them, but they need food just as much. Red-headed woodpeckers love them, especially if you're near water. Anyone know what this little fun booger is? Ground creeper. Sneaky little birds, but so fun when you spot them. They go up trees, but you know how our nuthatches go down upside down, these guys go up the right way. And they have these little tails that almost grip. They almost grip the tree. And if you've ever been in Central America, honey creepers, they call them, have almost the same behavior, except that the beak is different. But they're super cool and fun to watch, and sneaky as all get out. And then that's a red-eyed vireo there. Now, the red-eyed vireo I enjoy particularly because once he starts calling, you're never going to shut him up. So in early spring, if you're hearing a call over and over and over again, I'll show you how to record calls at the end of this. It may be a red-eyed vireo. What's fun about red-eyed vireo is what we've noticed, and this is not scientific, it's just my wife and I noticing it, is if one of them is showing up and calling, they tend to attract other warblers. For whatever reason, it tends to gin up the activity. I don't know why. I can't even back that up with science. We've just noticed it. So it's kind of a good energy tell. I asked next about what's frequent that we plant that's really good, and they said dogwoods. That was encouraging because I love dogwoods. But when I talked to Pete Stewart, our city forester, about it, and then talked to some birders about it, they said absolutely choose a dogwood 9 out of 10 times over the crepe myrtle if you can. Because the dogwoods will attract and support our thrush population, and will attract bluebirds, which we all like as well. So don't hesitate to plant dogwoods. Every now and then I've kind of, especially in my job as a parks director, when you get a park design, the architects always put dogwoods in it, and I've always been like, it feels trite, it feels rote. No, it's a good functional tree. I'm not backing away from her anymore. We're going to do red buds and dogwoods all day long because they provide such great habitat for those. So those are some of the trees. They gave me other trees such as spice bushes, yellowwoods. They're great websites if you just Google up trees. You can actually Google up the species of bird you want and a tree, and usually the great interweb will tell you, will that work or will that not work? So just some shortcuts there. We then got into flowers, and now I'm way out of my league, so I want to own this very proudly. But here's what I learned from talking to the friends at Wild Ones and Mark McKnight and his team over at Reflection Writing. The first key was plant 3 or more. Once you get to 3 or more flower and bunches of them, their pollination apparently increases substantially, and that's a big jump for the birds. So don't just pick 1s or 2s, go 3 or more and mass them in. Their pollination rate goes up, the nectar goes up, the birds go up. Think vertically in terms of how high they stand up when you pick your species, and plant tubular flowers. What they mean by that is they have a tube structure, and what we're after here are hummingbirds can get their beaks and their tongues all the way down into them, and we'll show you some examples here of that. And then think about something that's going to flower throughout the year. It's got to be a mix here. But when you pick them, ask what month does this flower in? And as far as you can push from April through October, do it with your different choices. So something is always going on in there. And I learned that this is very important here in the deeper south because our hummingbirds will arrive very early compared to the north. We may start getting hummingbirds, I was told, within the next 4 or 5 weeks. So if we can get those guys some fuel and get them going, it can be a very big help to them. And do deadhead as much as it stinks. Deadhead, deadhead, deadhead. That'll keep the productivity up with these guys, and that is the work of it. These were 4 species that were just suggested to me, or 3 were suggested, and then 1 is personal experience. The salvias we've always planted have been enormously a big home run with hummingbirds. They fight over them. But these are just some of the other species that have been selected. None of these are invasive. Now, the cardinal flower is technically a non-native, but it's not invasive, so we're okay with that. I'm not a purist in that respect, but make sure it's not invasive. But all of these flower at slightly different times. It'll give you that bluebird, possibly that oriole, but guaranteed, the other thing you want, they'll give you butterflies. So you get to pick up that color. And again, this is about tuning that dial in your yard. It's so neat to think about this dial that you get to tune up or tune down from what you want. Brush and log piles was mentioned next, particularly by a Fish and Wildlife guy who apparently doesn't have neighbors because he told me, I've got log piles all over my yard. I'm like, yeah, where do you live? Fine, sir. But in a city, we got to be reasonable and considerate of our neighbors and rodents. That said, well-organized brush piles that give you cover and don't allow rats and vermin to get in them. It's a balancing act, and we should all be responsible landowners with our neighbors. But what they give us is wrens. There are 7 species of wrens that live in Tennessee. And again, they're all nut jobs. Anyone want to try to ID these? Anyone know? Carolina. That's the old house wren. aggressive son of a gun, and migratory. So they're only here in the summer. Winter wren? Sedge wren.
House.
Sedge wren.
Which,
Sedge.
isn't there a house?
Right there.
Sorry.
You're okay. And they're all noisy, and they all have a lot of issues, and they're just a
But they
hoot.
have beautiful music.
They have beautiful music.
They sing
They certainly do.
beautifully.
And they're so much fun to have around, and they eat bugs. But they really need those wood piles and those brush piles to feel at home, to be happy. Every one of them needs water. Bird bass, bird bass, bird bass were continually recommended, particularly if you can have one that has moving water. And then what we experienced, and then I checked with some folks here, is what's really popping on now are these misters that you're putting in your trees and in your shrubs. And if you look up bird misters, it's kind of this growing thing where you do these little tubes up your tree. They just mist out a little bit of water, but it's enough to drip off the leaves. The sound and it dripping off the leaves will bring the birds in, more so than even bird baths. And it's a real low water use too. I got kind of freaked out when I asked people how much water does it take. It really doesn't take a lot. But we were up at Cape May and they had this whole Cape May is great for birds to begin with, but their watering solution was all these misters in the trees, and the birds would come up and take a couple of drips of it and bang off. And they're finding that's the same experience here, particularly for warblers and vireos and things that are a little bit rarer. They'll come into this sort of thing rather than coming to a bird bath necessarily. So, but the key was to have water and have fresh water available. The other key thing was the water needs to be close to cover so they don't feel like a predator is going to get them. So it's a balancing act. And also keep your water out of the hot sun during the hottest part of the day. I always think, I love my grandparents, bless their heart for being gone, but Granny would put the bird bath in the middle of the yard where it had to be 180 degrees every day by 2. That's not a good idea. Try to have it in a place where it can have shade in the afternoon. Climbing vines were a key one, both wild grape and Virginia creeper. And the reason why was orioles and catbirds and vireos again, with our favorite thrashers. And these climbing vines, I've learned living here in Chattanooga for about 2 minutes. It becomes kudzu if it doesn't become something else. It's not what we're suggesting. But these vertical vines give these birds a lot of habitat. And apparently, this is one of those species, again, turning that dial. This is like turning the dial like Spinal Tap to 11. If you get them going, you get grape going. Apparently, that's where the orioles will really start to show up. And you won't be able to keep them out. Tricky to figure out where you're going to do vines. You do it on your fence line, you talk to your neighbor, do you put up an arbor? All those choices make in your yard, but I heard over and over and over again in my learning that vines are really a game changer here. And then the ubiquitous and underappreciated catbird, who has another one of those great calls, one of our tropical migrators, really, really like them. So another bird that you can decide if you want in or not, apparently, by doing some vine planting. Shrubs. I'm just going to pick out one here. I could have done a whole lot more. Beauty bush. It's cardinal crack. And it grows here in this real churty, kind of crappy soil that we tend to have here. It's a very abuse-loving plant once you get it going. And its berries that turn this beautiful purple color and last through the winter are just absolute magnetic for cardinals around here in particular. Winterberry, serviceberry, any sort of berry shrub, they're all recommended. The key thing is, can we just have no more Nandina as long as we live in this community? It's poisonous. It's not particularly helpful, and we've got so many more beautiful local choices that we can do to take advantage of. And I love beauty. I mean, the purple in this beauty bush is just one of those rare colors in nature it makes me step back every time I see it. Grasses for a second, and this is for my little buddy, the yellowthroat, a very rare visitor to any of our yards because very few of our yards have marshes or have grasses, but you can try to bait them in. And it's very important too because I was advised that it's actually, the habitat's important, but even if you're not going to scale, these grasses are vital nesting material, where you want to leave it up for the year to catch it before you cut it back in February, and then those first sprouts will really come out and become nesting material. Habitat and cover, and then as I think we all know, late in the summer, if we've been around grasses, finches are going to dog those seeds. How many of us have seen that goldfinch sitting on that reed, and you're like, there is no way it's going to sit on that reed without the thing falling over, but somehow they do it. There are 2 grasses that work well, even in the smallest yards, because you can control them. The switchgrass, which is native, and that's a good one. Both these are native, and then little bluestem. Both very popular. Very important when you get the blue stem, get little blue stem and not big blue stem. Big blue stem will grow 10 feet tall. You will know if you've got a big big in about September when you lose your backyard. Little blue stem, you'll still be able to see your dog when it's out back and won't be lost. But both are absolutely fantastic grasses in very carefully chosen places. Does that make sense for plant material and that sort of stuff? We'll pivot to feeding and keeping these guys hungry. Where to place your feeders is every bit as important as the type of feeder that you choose. And we'll run through the types of feeders here. But everything Audubon tells us is that where we place them is very important. The first one is for you. Put it somewhere you're going to see it. There's no sense in having a feeder that's out of sight, out of mind. Put it somewhere you can enjoy it, and you can see it very easily. Because not only is it going to keep you filling it up when it gets empty, because if you see it, but you're just going to have more fun seeing the birds. So think about yourself when you do that. With very easy filling and cleaning. Think about access to perching branches or perching materials. If you have a power line nearby, if you have any low branches, anything like that, they're really going to like. Birds are always thinking, am I in danger or am I okay? Am I in danger or am I okay? Think about them from their perspective and give them a place to rest and chill out and cool down. Access to cover from the perching as well. That's where that shrub layer came in earlier. If they can have those 3 tiers, they're going to feel a lot better. And this is all I can see brains. This is where you start triangulating where you're putting this thing. You're trying to move in your space and go, okay, here. Yeah, the little bastards. It depends how you feel. I'm not anti-feeding squirrels. I just like to feed my birds instead. If you like feeding squirrels, go nuts. If you like flying squirrels like I do, go doubly nuts. You're lucky enough to have flying squirrels. But if you don't want squirrels, think about being at least 10 feet away from the nearest branch you can jump on, and think about baffles and everything else that I think we all know we have to do. Or just get your camera ready and see how squirrels can defeat every good plan that you come up with. By the way, our department, beginning next year, Eric, take a note, we will be celebrating National Squirrel Day. National Squirrel Day is January the 21st of each year. So we will be celebrating, and Eric will be dressed up as our mascot squirrel. Outstanding. And when you do, it's 10 foot, you can see here, this is just a really neat graphic to help you think through where you place it. Squirrel is about 10 foot from anything you can jump on. The other thing we want to consider is the window strike zone. And the guidance there is you either get 3 feet from your window, or you get at least 10 feet away. Anything in the middle is kind of a dangerous zone where they can leave the bird feeder and come smacking into your window. If you're 3 feet or close enough, they can't get enough speed really to hurt themselves. But you want to be considerate of the windows and window damage that can happen. And that's, just we've all had it because we all know the impression we've seen on a window and we've all heard it thump, and you're like, crap. How we can prevent that from happening, and it matters. So here's the recommendations on reducing window collisions. Move feeders and baths within either 3 feet, that's too close for a collision to be fatal, of windows, or more than 10 feet away. Birds will be more likely to recognize that the windows are part of the house. Unless you have windows that face each other through your house, a hawk comes and they're going to try to fly through it. I can't help you there. Bug screens year-round if you have them. If you have dual-pane windows, keep the screens in place. They can at least see the screen, and that gives you a little bit of fence. It also can absorb the strike. It gives that little bit of give that gives the bird a fighting chance. Vertical blinds, keep them halfway or more closed if you're not looking out the window. It's a solid wall. I like my windows open. It might not be the best idea to do it, or at least keep them somewhat slotted so it looks like a solid feature. Shades and curtains, if you aren't looking out the window and don't need to let the daylight in, keep them closed as well. Again, we're trying to give that solid wall so that bird has a fighting chance. And a big one, lights at night. Turn off lights or close curtains and blinds, or do task lighting wherever you work. I didn't mention it, we're going to talk about it now. This is what the U.S. looks like at night. I think we all know that image. 95% of bird migration takes place at night. That's when they're moving. And unfortunately, birds at night are at real risk. And this is where cities can make a difference. This is where cities can either cause harm or hurt. And I don't mean cities like city government comes in and does something. I mean, all of us who live in these places can be individual decisions that make a difference. Majority of birds migrate at night. It's a very risky undertaking. The estimate is in the millions of how many birds that die while migrating. As they pass over our big cities, they become disoriented and sky glow. The bright lights can override their internal compasses. They get confused and disoriented. Some of them use stars, some of them use magnetic. Cities are tough. They're very tough, especially when they're lit up like a Christmas tree. So anything each one of us can do to keep those lights out at night is every little bit helps. And when they start circling around, they're lost and they're confused and they collide with windows and buildings. How many of y'all have heard about or you've seen Central Park each year invariably has a great bird list, and they report these rare birds? Okay, let me be the one to tell you the sad news. The sad news is those birds are very confused because they're over New York and they're disoriented, and the lights have thrown them off and they don't know where to go. Now, thank goodness Central Park is there to receive them, but that's not natural. That prothonotary warbler who was there last year and tracked for like a month and everyone went nuts, had no business being there. That is a bird that was distracted and disturbed by lights and probably magnetic impulses and didn't know how to get back where he needed to be. So we can work on that. So turn off lights can literally save lives. And if you want to help, I'm going to go a little bit bigger here. We can actually help our migrating birds. There's a national campaign out of Ottawa now called Lights Out. Nashville has been the most recent sign-on to it, where cities are asking their commercial industries to turn off their lights at night. If you think it's important, we're about to unveil our climate action plan, encouraging your elected officials and folks to consider a lights out policy within that for Chattanooga so we become a bird safe city is something we can do. Indianapolis just did this. Asheville's doing it. Atlanta's doing it. A lot of these cities are starting to pick up the responsibility of lighting things at night, and what can we do to help? That's something we can do here in Chattanooga. You can reduce interior lighting yourself, turn off exterior decorative lighting, including floodlights, unless you need them. And then if we do need them, downshield them, have them look down, keep them as close to ground level as possible. And every little one of these drip, drip, drips can make a big difference. And if you want to know more about that, you can go to audubon.org, or they have an existing lights out program somewhere you can see every city and what they're doing and how they're taking this on. But it's a big deal. But the neat thing, look, we're not going to fix, there's a lot of things we can't fix in this world. This is actually one that's a switch. This is fixable. And it seems to me if we have fixable, pragmatic, practical stuff, we should just do it. This feels low-hanging fruit, pardon the statement, but it feels doable. So we'll get back to feeders now, but I wanted to throw out the nighttime stuff for y'all and get back to what makes feeders so exciting and so successful. So I'm going to run through now quickly just a bunch of the different feeders and what I've learned during my research and share with you. Again, this isn't 100% all good. There's a lot more out there you can find and learn if you're curious, and certainly what I'm saying, this is what I've just been able to learn. We're going to run through the first, the suet seed cake, the classic. We're then going to go through the finch feeder. We're going to go through something I've struggled with because we've never been successful, but the fruit jelly feeder for orioles, which in my experience has been a fruit and jelly feeder for bees and hornets. But I've been told that orioles one day may show up. We're going to talk about the standard seed-eating bird feed, talk a little bit about our bird baths, both big and large as well. So let's start with suet feeder. The state of the industry now is moving towards suet feeders with these baffle boards below them. And these baffle boards are designed to be framing so that our woodpeckers that use their tails to brace themselves have structure to brace themselves on. So we're seeing that become a deal. The nuthatches, chickadees, and wrens are fine. You want to place these, of course, so squirrels and raccoons and chipmunks cannot access. Very important, these are colder month feeders. They're high energy. They're not needed in the summer. But birds need every calorie they can possibly get this time of year. And this is like, how to describe it. This is the sugar diabetes track for birds, but they need it in the winter because they're just burning through it. And in the really cold times of year, if you can add high energy fruits and berries, go ahead and splurge for that $2.99 suet cake instead of the $1.99 one. I'm the cheap guy that goes for $1.99. But the fruit and that input really makes a big difference in helping them in the coldest months. There is a western tanager for who knows what reason right now in Louisville, and they've got this smorgasbord of blueberries and strawberries. I mean, you should see what he's eating. It's better than any restaurant I've ever seen. But he needs that energy food to have a fighting chance, and this is what it gives it to him. And then I said it earlier, consider the design with the prop for woodpecker tails. Particularly if your goal is pileated woodpeckers, the big ones, the big boys, those guys, which we have all over the place. We're going to have more of those because the emerald ash borer is moving through, and pileated woodpeckers love emerald ash borers, and they'll have more babies and they'll be more productive over the next 3 to 4 years as that cycles through. So you're going to see more of them. Unfortunately, that means our forests are in decline, So enjoy the woodpecker and feel sad at the same time. But the baffles and the way they can brace themselves really makes a big deal for success with pileated woodpeckers. Finch feeders, the trick with finches, I'm told, is that they have to feel safe. I wrote that down and nearly coughed because I'm like, I have never found a finch around us to not feel safe. They are the most prevalent birds we have. But the key, I was told, was place near cover and perches. Keep them out all year long. Keep these going. Keep the seed fresh and black. If the seed sits out there for too long, they're not going to come to it. They will only eat fresh seed that's black. And it's, as you all know, the Niger seed can be really expensive, so that's kind of a pain, but that's the deal. The other suggestion was if you're not getting them, add brightly colored ribbons to the feeders. The finches are attracted by motion and by color. And so if you're having trouble getting them, hang some ribbons from it, they'll see that, their eyes can see it, and they'll see that as action and energy and fuel. So it's another attractor to bring them in. And then I was told by Dr. Aborn to write this down in his exact words, so I did that, so I can't get yelled at. Finches are notorious for emptying only half the feeder. Empty the feeder of the remaining seed and check the freshness. If the seed is still good, fill the bottom half of the feeder with the new seed and put the leftover seed on top. This will ensure that the finicky finches are happy and healthy. I don't know how you dump and do half. Y'all figure that out. But it was I was instructed to convey this information to you. So that's the story with finches, because they'll eat half the food and leave, and you'll be like, what happened to my birds? Fruit and jelly feeders for our favorite orioles. And we have not had success with this, so this is just what I've learned, and this is what I've been told. Number one, put the feeders out early, in the early spring, because you're going to get them moving up. Put out in the open with high visibility. These orioles are moving in our treetops. They're just looking down as they move from treetop, high elevation birds. If you tuck it deep under shade, they ain't going to see it. So think about high visibility sites. Place near water. Moving water, particularly for orchard orioles, is a very big draw. Baltimore's can kind of they can be a little bit more sketchy, more dry land, but orchards are going to hang next to streams, creeks, wetlands. So find water if you can. Refresh consistently. They also are finicky eaters. Orange, orange, orange is the go-to. If you use grape jelly, that's fine, but everything I heard and was told was from the feeder. You see the feeder in the picture here, it's orange. You see orange is there, orange, 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 orange is the key. And then the guidance again, to me, this morning was be patient. It can take a couple years of work before you get them. Once you got them, you got it. They will be back every year, I was told, as long as they're alive. They will home into these things. But it's going to take some real dedication to get them, or you may get them the first year and then you're not allowed to come back to this next year and brag to us. It's going to make me feel really small, but give it time, and it is an investment time. Another thing I learned is if you get them, there's probably a good chance you'll get them to nest as well, because once they find that reliable food source, the nesting will occur nearby as well. And for the Baltimore Oriole, I would love to get them in our yard. That would be a home run for us. Seed feeders, the traditional, very traditional seed feeder setup that we know so well. It's for just about everything in the winter especially, so load them up. Have cover nearby with perching sites, especially if you can locate it by evergreen plants, again for the cover. Spread some on the ground for ground feeders. If you want those cool sparrows to come in, they're not going to come up to the feeder, they're ground feeders. So you can soup it up by throwing a little bit on the ground, or they'll just wait for the other birds to drop the good stuff and they'll hit it as well, but just a way to soup it up. Have water available all year long as well. Evidently, the sunflowers is a very dry seed for them, and the millet can be very dry compared to what they would be eating, so they're going to use more water. So keeping the water with this is a big deal. Mix in peanuts. They love peanuts, and they're emptying all of our bank accounts while they do this stuff. They want the high dollar stuff, but here we are. But do mix in the peanuts. Disinfect and clean feeders regularly. We lived through this before we moved down here in Louisville. I don't know if it was down here or not. It was 2 years ago, horrible songbird kill in Kentucky. It was horrible. I mean, numbers were like 60% of songbirds at feeders that were infected were dying. And what was found was, first, the state told everyone, take your feeders in, which was hard to hear, but it was the right thing to do. And then the next thing was, put them back out, but clean them religiously. And that's been hard. We've dropped that ball many times, but every 2 weeks, every month, disinfect and clean your feeders. And be prepared to do that, because if we're going to draw them in numbers, they will share. I think we are all tired of hearing about, we never used the term vectors for illness before, but I think we all know what a vector is now. or a super spreader event. Our feeders can be super spreader events if we're not responsible owners and we're not cleaning them out and keeping them clean. And then if you can't get your neighbors to start feeding as well, it really is a force multiplier. It really is. If you can get your neighbors, encourage them to do it, exponentially numbers will go up. It's hard to fly solo in this world. And then keep your dogs and cats away, giving your birds a safe place to feel safe. Some of y'all may be like us. Every time we let the dog out in the backyard, it's like, well, this should be interesting. Because every time it gets closer, she gets closer and closer. I don't think she has an in her, but one day there's going to be a death and fatality back there. I'm just waiting for it. But be thoughtful about that. And another thing, just on the dog front, I don't know about y'all, we've actually put a fence around our feeder because our dog likes to eat the sunflower seed shells. And our vet has told us that can be a real problem and jam their systems up if we let our dog eat too much. And our dog will just graze. So being thoughtful about what you're exposing your dog to as well with the feed can be a really important thing as a pet owner as well. Mealworm feeder. Now we've crossed the threshold. We're going to do it this year. And yeah, it's gross. Okay, but we're going in. And as I understand it, is absolute crack for the bluebirds. And if you want bluebirds, you put a mealworm feeder out. Thrushes love them. And then another fun one, I haven't had a picture of a kinglet up. Kinglets love them too. And if you all don't know the kinglets, they are a super fun bird with this great crown when they're really ticked off. They're like wrens, except they're like New York wrens. They get really let you hear about it. But they apparently all love the mealworms, frozen or living. Use a platform feeder away from windows and vegetation. The other guidance was if you get mealworms and they're near your windows, the birds will use the windows to wipe the mealworms down and create giant smears. So you want to keep it away from your window was the advice here. Expect to go through about 100 mealworms per day. So everyone here, we will count out our 100 mealworms and then we will place them out there. And that's important because, again, this was advice. Mealworms should only be used as a supplemental food source, only offered on a limited basis, because the birds will overfeed and that will cause health issues for the young and the adult. So while we have this tool at our disposal, the guidance is to be very judicious, be thoughtful, definitely put it out during bluebird nesting and season and when they're rearing their young before they fledge, definitely put it out there. It can help their success rate a lot, then pull it back. And mealworms are pricey. So I don't think any of us want to go bankrupt buying $100 worth of mealworms every week either. That can also just cause these guys to just overfuel themselves. And hummingbirds. We got to talk about the fun hummingbirds. The best show in town in August, as far as I'm concerned, and the most hilarious bird I think we have around here as well. Recommendation is install more than one. More is better. I don't know if you all live up in Lookout. There's this great house in Lookout Valley where this woman has out at least 16 feeders, and it is awesome. The zoo out there is crazy, and the cats aren't even giving up. The cats just kind of walk by, and everyone's fine with it. But more is better. And I think everyone here that's been around has seen how the males will swoop in and do that big swooping arc when they're defending their feeder. That's what they're doing. They're defending their territory and get real aggressive about it. So you want to put more than one feeder out and it will attract them in. Place near flowers if possible. That feels like a duh, but that's a multiplier. Place near a water source as well. The calorie burns of these hummingbirds is absolutely remarkable. And if any of y'all seen the special on hummingbirds on PBS, this is a species that lives on the brink of starvation every moment of their life. They're balancing starvation and how much they're burning. They have to eat before they go to bed every night and they wake up in nearly catatonic starvation state in the morning. It's a remarkable species that's been able to walk that thin line as long as it has. Put out an area that's visible, but in shade during the hottest part of the day. The sugar water boiling is not good for anybody. So find a place that in the hottest part of the day is still in the shade but still visible. That's a really tough line to walk, I know. That's what they're looking for. Clean frequently, police for bees. Skip the red food coloring entirely. They don't need it, they don't care. The red feeders, the attraction of that will take care of it. And then this was guidance for Chattanooga specifically, and it was new to me, was hang from mid-March through early November, which is earlier than I'm used to, but apparently that's the time to do it. And go through mid-November because be on the lookout for these rufous hummingbird visitors. These guys are western hummingbirds, but are starting to show up here with more and more frequency. And if you get one in your yard and in your feeder, it may stay with you all the way through the winter. And if you do, keep feeding it, by all means. And you can see how different it looks from our ruby-throated hummingbirds. It's a rarity, and if you get it and post it on eBird, just get ready. Everyone's going to line up in front of your house, all the birders, to want to come over and see it, like the movie The Big Bird year, when they're knocking on the person's door to come see the rare hummingbird. They will do it. But there's a chance, and the state's avian biologist told me that's another one of those climate change birds that we're starting to see more and more of with frequency there.
The name
Rufus.
of it?
Rufus. Birdhouses, very basic. And I'm going to use a lot of words here, but I was told to use these words, and their wives, they don't trust me, just to kind of riff. Birdhouses should be constructed of untreated wood and only painted on the exterior. Incorporate the hinge side that makes it simple to clean. Many species won't use a birdhouse if it has a nest from a previous year inside. Use early February to clean any debris out of the birdhouse long before the songbird breeding season begins, so do clean them out. Entrance holes should be 1 3/8 inch diameter or smaller to keep starlings out. You will not keep house wrens out, and you probably won't keep really house sparrows out in many cases, but you can keep starlings out, which is a goal. No perches on the front. The only birds that use them are nuisance, non-native starlings, and house sparrows. That was a new one for me. They don't need that little stick that comes out that I always look at and go, oh, we should get that one, because it can come home and sit on its porch and have a good day. And they don't care. Drainage holes on the bottom to allow rain escape, and ventilation holes as well. You want to move air through because there's so much chance of disease in these nests. Sides should enclose the floor to keep rain from entering. And a sloped roof is what they recommend to keep most rain out. You're not going to be totally waterproof. That'll help a lot. And then a small detail, but if you're building them at home and you're handy, put some grooves leading to the exit holes so when the babies fledge, they have something to grab onto to lift themselves out to exit the hole. Again, that's one of those small design matters can make a big deal of difference. If it's slippery and slick, it's more difficult for them to get out. But that was kind of the key. Next one is at least 25 feet apart, regardless of species. Give them the room. Now, obviously, there are species that are different. I bet everyone going, wait a minute now. Martin houses, they all live in these nice little colonies, and they like apartments and they like density. Well, those are city dwellers. I don't know what to do with city people. You know, they have their life. This is for our other residents who are more suburban. 5 feet off the ground minimum. That's more to keep cats and rodents and snakes discouraged, but not eliminated. And then this was news to me as well. Put them up as soon as you clean them in mid-February. The first migrators are going to really start moving through here pretty early. This is earlier. I just moved here from Louisville last year. This is new to me to be in this part of the country to be doing them this early. Y'all are probably used to it. That's a jump for me. So that was pretty interesting. And so ultimately, if we do all those things, we get some pretty interesting birds. And I want to brag a little bit because these are the birds that my wife and I have seen in our little quarter-acre backyard just since we moved in there in September. And we live right here in town. Brown-headed nutheads. That was a new life bird for us, here at least. That was so cool to see, and we saw it like on the first day. Anyone know what this is? It's a red star. It's the male. Female's lighter. They were bugging through in the fall. There's my blue-gray gnatcatcher again. We had a bunch of them moving through the trees. They're hilarious. It's a thrush. I'm probably going to be wrong here. I think this is the Swainsons. Swainsons and hermits we both had. Blackburnian warbler. We had tremendous warblers this fall, just in our oak trees. We would just come home and sit on our back porch. Again, yards smaller probably than this room in many respects. And we counted probably 10 species of warblers that were moving through. And then at night now, we're hearing a pair of great gray owls. Right downtown. Great horned owls, my fault. Not great gray. We went looking for those. We failed miserably. Let me own that. We were in Duluth and I looked for them for 3 days. We didn't see them. That's why it's stuck in my head. But great horned owls. And that's right here in our city. That's pretty remarkable, y'all. I think it's pretty special. And not something we should take for granted. As your parks director, it's my job to build habitat for these guys in all of our parks. We should have space for these critters at Summit of Softball. We should have space for them in Coolidge. We have to take a little different look on how we manage our habitat. But if each one of us in our little houses, produce a little room for these boogers, I'm not going to say we're going to save the planet. Start. Feels like we're doing something. We're helping a couple species, and I think that's worth it. So the final tips that I'll share with you, and then I'll take questions and not know answers, is place feeders where they can be viewed. Do keep your binoculars and cameras handy. You never know what's going to pass by. I can't think how many times I've seen something like, keep it out. Record what you see. This is the pass it on family tradition stuff. You never know when you can inspire the next generation. And even if they think it's lame, and you're talking to your grandchild or your child and they're 6 years old or they're a teenager and like, this is horrible, it's not. That may change when they're 25 and 30 years old. And you're paying it forward that way. It's passing on the legacy. Clean your feeders. Share your love. I say this with everything we do in our department. Have fun. Find joy. Smile. This world has enough darkness. It's okay to smile and share joy and come into work Monday morning and go, you won't believe what I saw in my backyard. And you never know how much that'll rub off on everyone else around you. That sense of wonder that we need, that sense of awe, that sense of humans are not the biggest show. There's this other show going on around us that's flat out more spectacular than anything I can imagine. I think that is so powerful to human nature. I think it gives us hope in cities. I think it gives us the courage to find the confidence to address the big problems we have. I know it's a small way. You can call me an idealist. I don't care. I can take it. I'm middle-aged. I don't care anymore. These are the moments of hope we find in these mysteries that just circulate around us. If we're just sensitive and thoughtful and slow enough to just pause and go, wow, and recognize these stories have been around us for thousands and tens and 20s and 30s and thousands of years. And there's a story, there's a legacy, if we're keen enough to listen, we should pick up on something. And support active conservationists. I don't know, I'm not used to being a government employee, I'm used to being in a nonprofit sector, so I just keep doing this. If there's a conservationist out there doing something you believe in, support them, because they're on the front lines and they're fighting. And they're fighting hard days, and they're losing some battles. Your support means a lot. Donation, time, talent, treasure, whatever. Whatever cause you believe in, dial into those folks, because they're on the front lines of protecting the stuff. Because every yard in Chattanooga can have all of these critters. And you can't say the same in San Diego, you can't say the same in Seattle. This is us. I think it's a pretty cool story to be able to tell. A couple quick resources, you probably already know about them. iNaturalist as a tool to become smarter about not only the birds but the plant species. It's an incredible resource by National Geographic. There are 8 billion phone apps you can use now, from Merlin to eBird to Sibley. One favor, there is a call feature on all of these. And we have a lot of folks, I see them in this park, that are running around like Pokemon playing the call, hoping to see something come out. Be judicious. The bird is going to waste energy chasing that call because it thinks it's looking for a mate. I get it on a rare occasion. I'm guilty. I've done it on a rare occasion when you want to see that bird. And it's very tempting, and they work very well. But just be judicious and recognize that bird that is trying to do 1,000 calories a day off seed this big doesn't have energy to blow chasing around your phone just because you're curious to see what it looks like. It's a small act, but it does make a difference. A lot of folks don't know it, but the Tennessee Aquarium is a phenomenal resource not only for aquatics, but also for birds, terrestrial resources. Kevin Calhoun and that team there are national leaders in this space. If you have a bird question, if you're interested, you're likely to find resources there that can help you. That's a nationally significant resource right here in our hometown. Most cities, 200,000 people, don't have this level of research or conservation being based right out here. You live on the front lines. And then you've got a lot of other assets. I bet a bunch of y'all are already connected to members of these groups, but they're doing great stuff. Mark McKnight and his team, they're drilling into our natives, helping us rediscover our native ecology. Doing wonderful work out there that we hope to draw out across the entire city with them in partnership. Wild Ones, elevating our native plants across our community as well, because there's so much here in Appalachia that we can celebrate during our native plants. The Master Gardener program, the Chattanooga Audubon site that managed, of course, you all know. McClellan Island right out here in front of me, but the Audubon Preserve as well. Allies, protecting habitat in the urban core that could all use your support, your time, but they're also resources if you're curious and you have questions. And they all know a heck of a lot more than me because they're the people I call up to make most of these slides. And can give you all of that help. And I'll close because I can, and I generally include this no matter what. I'm a huge Barry Lopez guy who we lost to cancer a couple years ago. But this is what Barry said about birds in Arctic Green when he was up looking at Lapland longspurs and horned larks. And I'll read it because I can't, if you don't know glasses. I felt a calmness birds can bring to people. And quieted, I sense here the outlines of the oldest mysteries. The nature and extent of space, the fall of the light from the heavens, the fully enough time in the present as if it were water. And I really believe birds give us that even in our urban setting with the beeps and the horns and everything, that sense of timelessness. And I find it renewing to my spirit on my hard days. Maybe you do too. And what's neat is we can just tap into it because it's all around us. We'll just take a couple small steps. That's all I had for y'all. I can take questions, or I can be a moron or not answer them, and you just hold on to the fact that I am a moron, and we'll be okay with that too. So thank you guys for coming. It's so great to see this interview. Yes, ma'am.
I have two questions. One, how do you clean the feeders? I'm assuming not like chemicals.
Not chemicals. You want to disinfect those. So do bleach to disinfect, and then rinse and let air dry.
Okay. Second question. I would like to track raptors to deal with the rodents, but aren't they also predators of little birds as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't have a solution for you there. I mean, you can talk to them. Red tails will listen, but yeah, it's the cycle of life. It's we had Jen's here, my wife, and I think it's the first time I told this story in front of her. But I was some conference I was at. I was like, yeah, the majesty of nature and all this. And I go, we had an incident in our yard where the hawk came in and destroyed a bunch of birds and left, and all you saw was like the feathers. And it's kind of tragic, but on the other hand, you're like, it's kind of cool at the same time. So it is what it is. Well, thank you all so much. I'm happy to mill around on that, Burke. Yeah.
So you use low concentration of these, I guess.
Yeah.
1 in 10.
1 in 10, 1 in 8, and 1 in 10 is what I just read. Yeah, thank you for asking that. You're not going to throw the whole bleach can on it, you know. We're not going U.S. Army cleanliness here, but yeah. I think, and you should Google it, you should confirm that yourself, but I think it's 1 to 8 to 1 to 10. Thank you for the clarification. All right. Well, I'll hang out. Y'all hang out. Welcome to Outdoor Chattanooga. We're glad you came. Eric, did I screw anything up? Am I still employed?
You did perfect, man.
Okay.
Guys, thanks Scott one more time. And thank y'all for coming out, guys. We got a lot more winter workshops coming up throughout the month of February, so come back and see us. All that information's up front and on our website. Thanks again.